Hey, welcome back to Media and Crime. I'm Dr. Jensen. It's good to see you. And we're moving on with some new material at this time. Now remember, for Module 1 and every module, we get about 2.5 weeks to spend per module. So don't feel like you have to do all these lectures in one day or even 1 week. You can kind of get to them a little bit each day during that period of the semester. So just remember what part you're on. This is part 5 for Module 1. And you can always see how many parts there are. Just look for the very end of the video link and the PDF files that correspond to it, and you'll be able to see which one you haven't done yet. So we're getting into theory, and I thought we should take a look at some of these theoretical concepts from Surrett so you understand them better and you can apply them in your work. So theory kind of gets a dirty name. You know, people don't like it. It's very abstract, very complicated, hard to understand. But, you know, what is a theory? All it really is just ideas about observable events or phenomena. You make connections and you suggest explanations. That's it. That's all it is. We theorize every day and try to explain the world around us. It's not very hard. All theories have assumptions. You have to start from somewhere. And those assumptions lead us to examine events to find evidence of what we believe is happening, to underscore or demonstrate why it is the way it is. Now, most theories encounter empirical testing through science and a lot of other methods where we challenge the theory's validity, reliability, and generalizability. And essentially, that's how we create new knowledge and try to find out how the world works around us. So I just wanted to make sure we're all comfortable with theory before we jump into the deep end of the pool and start talking about social constructionism. So what is that when we kind of drop that phrase in there? All social constructionism is a theory of knowledge in sociology and communication that examines the development of jointly constructed understandings of the world that form the basis for our shared assumptions about reality. And it has a heavy emphasis on interaction and experience, trying to come up with symbols and meanings for things that we can use to understand how the world works. That's it. It draws very heavily from an area of sociology called symbolic interactionism, or in other areas of scholarship, it also is referred to as phenomenology. Okay? So you can find a lot of academic disciplines that borrow from social constructionism because it's very prolific. So when we look at this term, we borrow from Lippmann, okay? And Lippmann has a lot of good contributions on this. Lippmann says, we do not see and then we define. We define first and then we see. So we have to organize our thoughts about what's in front of us to really understand what's going on. Now this applies to crime and justice. So essentially, do we know how to look for crime until it's defined? And most legal scholars will tell you a crime isn't a crime until it's against the law. It has to be legally defined as wrong with a punishment prescribed for it. Carrier's case is an example of conduct not being a crime until it was defined as such. And we'll be looking at that again later. So these are when, new laws come into play, things like cyber crimes and identity theft. We didn't have crimes and laws like that a few decades ago. They had to be created and invented. Otherwise, it was hard to know what was right and wrong and what the boundaries were. This also applies to media presentations, where media use events, whether they're live or fictional, and they translate these events via an angle or a frame or perspective, and then they present them in that light. Recall that in our dime crime novels, crime was framed as a class issue with the rich against the poor, and poor people were exploited by the rich who bent the justice system to better their own self-interest. And that was a very popular theme. That created a lot of populist movements based on that as well. It really fed into that. So social constructionism can benefit us in looking at how all of this is portrayed by using this as a foundation. So essentially, Lippmann's paraphrase adopts a social constructionist ontology, which is just simply a philosophical orientation about the nature of reality and what's around us. So constructionism is really a form of idealist ontology and essentially says reality is internally created and subjective, so that there are multiple realities and interpretations where the observed and the observer are fused together. And these ideas are very foundational to what we're talking about here. So contrast this with a materialist or a realist ontology, where it says objective reality is a single external world of observables that are distinct and separable from the observer. And these things, again, are also foundational. So this goes into people's ideas of having one version of the truther, or one version or interpretation of the world, versus having these different perspectives and reactions to the same presentation. Hopefully this is coming together in some way that makes sense. But essentially we look at perception versus reality and identity and how it transforms us. So in social constructionism, we say that reality is really a collective hunch of what we think is happening around us. I think this is what's going on. So knowledge is really socially created, and it's passed on generation to generation. We generate knowledge by people acting in groups saying, this is what I think the law is. This is what I think a crime is. This is how I think we should share with each other and send information to each other. And the focus really is on human relationships and how people in those relationships perceive reality. And when it's shared, then we can say, okay, then this must be what reality is. It really emphasizes those shared meanings, and it looks at how we come to share meaning together. It is social, and it's not really individualistic or what we call solipsistic, where really nothing can be known except for but the self and what's inside of us. So really it says, hey, we all have to agree that this has this meaning. So here's an example. It's a very common social construction of slavery and of oppression to look at some of these iconic symbols of the South, like the Confederate flag and Robert E. Lee and things like that. But you could argue that there are varying conceptions of what those symbols represent and how they are interpreted across different societies. But you could say there is a very general consensus out there in society that those symbols have some negative connotations ascribed to them as far as what they represent. You could also say that, the U.S. flag has certain meanings that we all share with it. Or even looking at the presentation of handcuffs, the presentation of bars on a window or a door, the presentation of cameras and what they should be doing, presentation of laptops, of what a judge is, what a reporter is. We have to share and subscribe to what these ideas are to kind of have a shared reality of them. Okay, to say that's what prison looks like, this is how the news happens, this is against the law, and so forth. So essentially, when we look at sources of constructed social knowledge, we have a couple places we get this from. The first place is our own experienced knowledge, and we learn from what happens to us, kind of in a grand experiment, okay? So note that you have to interpret it, so you'll probably have to borrow a little bit from shared meanings available to you, or something maybe that you've seen before but not personally experienced, and that matters when it comes to crime and media. And note that you may emphasize features that other people would not because of your own values and what's important to you. So it's not very systematic and verifiable because it has all that subjectivity going on in there, where we sort and filter through things that may matter or not matter to us to make something meaningful. You're very likely to fill in the gaps when information is incomplete and make assumptions, because we can't just float around society with all these incomplete thoughts. We'll go crazy. So, if someone stands in front of us and let's say we don't know what racial identity they have, we start thinking about our own experience with people that may resemble them and say, well, this person has certain physical attributes that look like this other person I know, so maybe they are this racial identity. And then that might be our closest estimate as to what they are. So when we don't know what's going on, we have to look at other experiences and other ideas to try to make suggestions so that every time we encounter someone that has maybe some shared physical traits or attributes, we don't go, oh my goodness, I don't know who you are, I don't know what your identity is, I got to rethink this from scratch. The brain likes to take shortcuts. And so this is where things like stereotypes come into play. And we have to reconstruct what someone looks like or who someone is when those stereotypes are challenged. Oh, really? Maybe I thought you were white. You're actually Native American. I thought you were Latino, but actually you're Asian. You know, so we have kind of assumptions we make about skin color, about eye color, about hair, about features on the face, hands, so many things, but there's so much variation in physical attributes that we get it wrong a lot of the time. Yet we're going to think about what those shortcuts are. Okay, well, people of this ethnic or racial identity often have these features, so you must be this. And again, it's not to be, you know, discriminatory in our behavior or subscribe to bigoted beliefs. It's that we're trying to sort through experienced knowledge and fill in those information gaps. Everyone does it. It can have some real consequences when we're wrong, but we all try to sort through the facts that are inside our brains. You may actually create lies in some situations that aren't really true. So we have to be very careful with our own experience knowledge when we maybe emphasize certain things over others. So think about it this way. Let's say you experienced a really profound event in your life, something that a lot of people would say, yes, that's a profound event, like becoming a parent for the first time. That tends to have a life-changing experience attached to it, being a mother or father. But what it meant to you then as a new parent might have different meaning later, right? Where we maybe encounter someone who's a new parent and suddenly we're sifting through and recycling all these ideas that happened at that time and realizing that certain things matter to us then, but there are other things that matter to us now. And sometimes we realize, oh, I thought parenting worked like this. Turns out it really doesn't. Or I worried about this. It actually doesn't matter. And so we create misconceptions or lies. And also our experience knowledge really may not hold up against external standards. Just because it's something we experienced and we know doesn't necessarily mean it's a widespread generalizable experience to everyone. Maybe becoming a parent was not a profound moment in your life. So again, we have to kind of see how this is shared and accepted as a group in society. Another source of constructed social knowledge is what we call symbolic reality. These are representations that we believe about the world, but that we did not personally experience. So it's something we kind of use to draw conclusions on because maybe we haven't had the experience or we shouldn't have the experience, but we want to know about it because of our own curiosity and our desire to make sense of things around us. So this reality is largely received from others, and one of those places could be media. It's usually shared with at least some others where maybe we talk about, hey, did you see that movie? Did you watch that viral video? Did you see that on the news last night? Or what do you think about this politician or this offender or this victim or this celebrity? We start discussing these ideas because of these portrayals. It may also be obtained through family, friends, education, religion. It might be built on different foundations, like our own ideologies about how we think things work, theology, our own beliefs about our purpose in the world and what happens to us when we die, and kind of how things work and the big questions of why and who and how. It might come from science, things we've read about that have largely been ascribed to be true, or even just rumor and gossip. I heard this about you. I don't know if it's true, but I'm now collecting my own observations to verify that it is and maybe find out later it isn't. But again, note that this shared symbolic universe may or may not be accurate. Like the long-held Christian truth that the earth was the center of the universe was very much, rebuted, right? And rebuffed. No, it's not. Actually, there are other planets in the universe, and the sun is really the center of the universe. So we challenge these ideas as we become more sophisticated as people, and we have more options for seeking knowledge and seeking truth. Okay, but again, you might be able to start to see how these ideas play into what is presented to us and how we take this into informing our own ideas, our own identity, our own version of reality, and how we think things work and what happens. So we'll kind of stop here because I know this is a lot of heavy thinking stuff to consider, but we'll pick up on this for next time.